If you hate parts of yourself, this might be the most important video you ever watch. Today we're going to talk about the things about yourself that you hate, because every single one of them is a gift, and when you finally see that, everything changes. Welcome to day 4 of the Love Who You Are playlist. I am Angie, your inner glow coach, and today we're going to go deep on self-compassion. I'm going to build on the personal story from video 1 of this series. So if you haven't watched that one yet, watch that one first. Or if you just kept watching and haven't seen it, the short version is my parents may have loved me, but a lot of the times they treated me like they didn't like me. So I developed a belief that I didn't deserve to be loved. So in turn, I started treating myself how my parents did, with self-abandoning behaviors or ignoring myself. And I was a perfectionist, so I set impossible standards for myself. And by the way, impossible standards are different than having high standards. I set impossible standards, and then I would berate myself for not meeting them. And my critical inner voice that berated me was not my own voice. It was the voice of my mom, who was extremely critical towards me. But since I didn't have any self-worth, I believed her voice. So another way of saying this is I was my own bully and emotionally abusing myself, on top of the emotional abuse from her. Also, this is not talked about enough, but the critical inner bully, and by the way, I have a whole separate playlist that goes deep on the critical inner voice. So if you're interested in that, you may want to check that out. But your critical inner voice is emotional self-harm. So in addition to emotionally self-harming myself, I eventually started self-harming myself physically. And it's not what you think, because I was actually doing it in a socially acceptable way. It started out innocently. In my junior year of high school, I saw a Paula Abdul VHS tape at Target. It was a dance tape. And yes, I went to high school in the late 90s, so there were VHS tapes. And I was a fan of Paula during her peak, which was like the early 90s, but this was several years after her peak. So I'm not totally sure what intrigued me about this video. It could have been the fact that Target is basically merchandising magic, and everything sold at Target looks like this bright, shiny object that you just have to have. So I bought it, or my mom bought it for me, and every day after school, I would immediately change into my workout clothes and dance with Paula in my bedroom before starting on my homework. And it was so much fun. And as an unintended consequence, I started losing weight. And I wasn't overweight to begin with. I think I weighed like 125 pounds. And just to put things into context, I'm 5'5". I think I was 5'5" in high school. So that's not overweight at all. But being an overachiever, I soon became addicted to seeing the number on the scale creep downward. And I don't really remember at what point it became unhealthy and out of control, but the summer before my senior year, I only weighed 85 pounds, and I was miserable. However, it was oddly comforting because my emotional world with my family was like so disconnected. So somehow it was comforting that my internal world of disconnect now matched my external world. And adding to this dynamic, my family was so emotionally closed off and swept everything under the rug. So my skeletal appearance and obsessive eating habits were elephants in the room. Like, neither one of my parents ever said anything to me about it. But then one day during the fall of my senior year, my mom approached me to say that she had scheduled an appointment for me with a therapist. And even though I didn't necessarily want to go to therapy, a part of me was really excited because she was finally concerned about how I was feeling. But that was actually not the case, because she told me the reason that she wanted me to go to therapy is because my friend's parents had said something to her about my emaciated appearance, and the questions were too embarrassing for her. And those were her exact words. So that was soul crushing, but as much as I didn't want to go to therapy, I was miserable and I wanted things to change. So I went to therapy, and I'm 17 years old. I had never talked about my feelings or anything, so it was so weird and uncomfortable. But my therapist was very direct, and that style of questioning quickly revealed that I was hurting about my parents being emotionally unavailable. My dad because he was an alcoholic, and my mom because she was so enmeshing, and that is a form of emotional unavailability. Obviously, I wasn't describing in these words as a 17-year-old. But anyway, because I brought these issues up, at the next appointment, she invited my mom to our next session. And by the way, my mom was so hell-bent on me going to these sessions. I was a senior in high school and I had my own car, so I drove myself to and from school. But my mom was so hell-bent on me going to these sessions that she would take time off work, pick me up from school, and take me to therapy to ensure that I went. So when I say she invited my mom to our session, my mom was in the waiting room. And the therapist invited her to our session, and she started asking my mom about my dad's drinking or whatever. And all I really remember, I remember my mom being uncomfortable, but I also remember the therapist asking her, would you feel comfortable having a family conversation about his drinking habits and how they affect the family? And I don't remember what she said or what was really resolved in the session, but this is what I remember. On the way home, we stopped at Dairy Queen before she took me back to school. And part of it, I think it was an attempt to feed me high-calorie food to gain weight. But anyway, we were sitting outside eating. I'm sure I was eating an Oreo Blizzard because that was my favorite. And she was like, do you want to keep going to therapy? And obviously, I'm 17 years old. It was awkward. So of course I didn't. So I was like, no. And she was like, okay. So after that day, I never went back to therapy, because once she realized it was something that she needed to be involved with, she didn't want anything to do with it, because she wanted it to be an issue with me that I had to fix. But the problem was that this eating disorder, which is self-harm, it was still very present. So anyway, she threatened me. She was like, you can't go away to college if you don't gain weight. So I gained a bunch of weight, which was basically, I still got back to 125, but I just felt so gross and disgusting. And it's a much longer story than this, but my point is I struggled with eating disorders for the next 20 years, which were mostly in the form of undereating and overexercising, which are both forms of physical self-harm, which was coming from a place of self-loathing and not loving or accepting myself. And the bigger issue is these are both socially accepted forms of self-harm, because I would get praised for finishing a marathon or having six-pack abs, and the truth was I was destroying myself. So if someone cuts themselves or is a drinker or does drugs, it's socially unacceptable. But there are forms of self-harm that are very destructive that are actually socially acceptable. And the eating and exercising and all of that doesn't even break the surface, because I also engaged in toxic relationships and, other behaviors that just reflected my self-hate and self-harm. And my point of all of this is that a huge part of my healing journey was learning self-compassion, because the self-hate and self-harm was ingrained so deep. And I have an entire playlist on self-compassion, and I'll put that link in the description. And that goes into way more details on these points. But self-compassion is such a huge part in loving and accepting yourself. So I do want to cover some things here. And the first thing I want to talk about is nervous system regulation. And that might not make sense at first, so stay with me. Because before you can change your relationship with yourself, you need to understand what's happening inside of you. Because nervous system regulation is the root of everything. Without this, self-compassion feels impossible. Because when your nervous system is activated, when you're overwhelmed or anxious or perfectionistic or spiraling, your brain shifts into survival mode, and that's when you engage in these self-harm behaviors or dysfunctional behaviors. And even though survival mode is meant to protect you, sometimes it also means attacking yourself. So the first step that we're going to work on for today's video is awareness. And that's it, because awareness simply means noticing. So instead of beating yourself up because you make a mistake and thinking the world is going to end and having so much shame about who you are and overreacting about all of that, just be aware that your nervous system is reacting because you may have made a mistake and you're having a triggering event. But it's okay to feel how you feel. But keep in mind, you're a human being and it's okay to make mistakes. It's not okay to let those feelings of shame or anger or anxiety consume you, which is why later in this video, I'm going to talk about how to feel safe in your body while feeling your feelings. Because part of self-compassion, or a big part of self-compassion, is understanding that you're a human being and you're not going to be perfect all of the time. And that's okay. And I know awareness sounds small, but it's huge, because when you're finally consciously aware of it and you're doing something about it, you're interrupting the subconscious pattern, which you've been blindly running on this entire time. So I want you to start working on simply being aware for your self-compassion practice. Just be aware of the moments where you're kicking yourself for making a mistake or not being perfect. And just be like, I notice that I'm having a physical reaction to this. Maybe your chest is tight. I notice that I'm feeling anxious. I notice that I have the urge to criticize myself right now. Just be aware. You're not trying to fix anything right now. Simply get in the practice of being aware. And just like all my other videos, there will be action steps at the end. So stay until the end, because today I'm going to go deeper on this and show you how to regulate your nervous system in real time. Another thing I want to talk about is your critical inner voice. And again, I have an entire playlist on this, so I'll put the link in the description if you want to go deeper. But for the purpose of this series, I'm going to keep it simple. Your critical inner voice is not you. It's the voice of a critical parent or teacher or some other authority figure in your childhood or teenage years. It is not your voice. We are all born with this light inside of us. We are born loving ourselves. We learn these critical behaviors from people outside of us. So that voice is not yours. You were not born with it. The bad news is it may never go away. And that's okay, because the good news is we can learn how to make friends with it. And you can start by, again, being aware when you're doing it. And when you catch yourself doing it, just simply stop. You don't have to shame yourself, but reframe the voice to something you would tell a friend or someone you loved. So for example, if you make a mistake, your critical inner voice may be like, you're such an idiot, you can't do anything right. But what would you say to a friend? You might say something like, you're learning, you'll do it right next time. Like, that's it. And trust me, once you get in this practice, it gets so much easier and your critical inner voice does lessen. Again, it may never go away, but it gets better. And again, someone else put that voice in your head, but you don't have to keep encouraging it. Encourage your loving voice, because that's your real voice. And that's why you speak to other people that way. Your mean voice isn't going to run the show anymore. Lastly, we're going to talk about the things about yourself that you hate, because every single one of them is a gift, and when you see that, everything changes. again, you're not born hating parts of yourself. You're born as this big ball of bright, fully expressed light. So if you hate parts of yourself, they came from experiences such as criticism, pressure, trauma, comparison, rejection, or just in general, moments where you didn't feel safe being yourself. So your brain did what all logical and very smart brains do. It created a story that sounds like, I'm too much, I'm not enough, I should be different, there's something about me that I need to fix. And the more that you repeat these stories to yourself, the more that they become your identity. So that self-hate you may feel is not you. It's this collection of survival strategies. And one of the most powerful things that I've learned, and I teach my clients this, is that the traits that you dislike the most about yourself often hold your greatest strengths. So for example, I used to hate the fact that I was anxious. And not only did I hate it, I carried a lot of shame around it and I tried to hide it. And when I really thought about it, it made me realize that my anxiety made me hypervigilant. And that hypervigilance is one of the reasons that I'm so in tune with my intuition. Because when you're always walking on eggshells and trying to predict what happens next, it forces you to tap into your intuition. So another example that people might be able to relate to, because a lot of us are sensitive, meaning that we feel heavy feelings. And for instance, our parents may have told us that we were too much because they couldn't or didn't want to deal with our feelings. But on the spectrum of feelings, you have like the dark feelings like anxiety, sadness, anger, which don't necessarily feel that great. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have love, appreciation, joy, and gratitude. So yes, we feel the dark things deeply, but we also feel the amazing things deeply. And that is the gift. So actually, I'll give one more example. So take being a perfectionist. So yes, it can be exhausting to have all these negative aspects to it, but it also means that you care deeply and you're a high achiever and you have a high standard for your life, which is actually a good thing. So my overall point is, where there's a shadow, there is also a gift. So since this is the last video of the series, and I can't decide which of these topics to create action items around, I'm going to give you 2 action items. And it's not to overwhelm you, so give yourself time so that you can do this intentionally. Because this isn't just about information, it's about integration. So for the first action step, you're going to write down every single thing that you don't like about yourself. So do that part first, write down the entire list, try to make at least a page, and then next to each one, identify the gift that lives underneath it. So again, anxiety could be intuition, or the gift in being controlling is that you're organized and responsible. So instead of labeling the seemingly negative things, you're also finding the gift in them. And it's not about toxic positivity, because you're embracing the full picture of who you are. So yes, I'm controlling, but I'm also organized and responsible, and you're owning all of it. So the key is not to look at controlling as negative, it's to look at yourself as a whole. And the reason behind this exercise is a lot of the underlying emotional intensity or the trigger for our stories is shame or not feeling emotionally safe. So this is just establishing less shame, because we're actually making friends with our shadows by finding the gifts. And it makes us feel safe actually sitting in these thoughts and processing our feelings behind these things, which leads to a deeper connection to ourselves. And I think you'll find as you're going through this exercise that your critical inner voice is going to be pretty quiet, because this is truly tapping into the compassionate side of yourself. So for each one, Be honest, and remember to be gentle with yourself if you feel the feelings coming up, and approach it with curiosity. Why am I feeling this way? It's not about being perfect. It's about growing, being a better version of ourselves, and loving and accepting ourselves as a whole. So the second action item is about nervous system regulation, because, and maybe you can practice it while you're doing that exercise, but one thing I want to teach you is in these moments of where we get triggered and the emotional intensity is high and we feel like our feelings are consuming us. Like, so for example, I used to be chronically anxious and I felt like my anxiety was consuming me. But when we're triggered in those situations, this is a scientific fact. The physiological sensations in our body only last for 90 seconds. So, for example, if you're like me, like when I feel anxious, I feel it in my chest. Like sometimes it even feels like I'm having a heart attack. But those physiological symptoms in our body, they only last for 90 seconds. The reason why they last longer is because of the stories that we tell ourselves in our head. So for example, if I'm having an anxiety attack and I feel the pressure on my chest, and then I start telling myself that I'm having a heart attack and start going down that spiral, then it intensifies the situation and draws it out even longer. So unless you're really having a heart attack or medical emergency, yes, attend to that. But if you're not, the first step in nervous system regulation in these heightened emotional situations, simply get rid of the story, just for the moment. You do have to work on the story later because you'll probably have to do some belief reprogramming behind it. But just in the moment, to take down the emotional intensity so that you can work on the story later, just get rid of the story. And that's what I always tell myself. It's just temporarily, just get rid of it. And then the next step is simply to focus on the feelings that you have in your body. So for example, if your chest feels tight, then just focus on your chest feeling tight. And usually what I do is I'll put one hand where I'm feeling the physical sensation. So for me, it's on my chest. And then I usually put my other hand around my diaphragm or stomach to ensure that I'm breathing. So the entire 90 seconds, I take deep breaths, I focus on the sensation in my chest, and I repeatedly tell myself, I am safe in my body, I am safe in my body. Because the entire point of this is learning that you can feel safe in your body while feeling your feelings. Because like, even though it feel like they may be like consuming you, you have control over whether they're really consuming you or not. So if you don't feel safe in your body, this is a huge practice that I highly, highly, highly recommend. Remember, you were not born hating yourself. You were not born with a critical inner voice. And you definitely weren't born believing that you were too much, not enough, too emotional, too anxious, or too intense. Those were stories that your nervous system created to survive environments that didn't feel safe. But they're not serving you anymore. And the moment you stop attacking yourself for surviving, you begin glowing up and upgrading your identity. Self-compassion is strength because you can't expand into your next level while secretly bullying yourself. And if you've watched this whole playlist and you're done learning more information and you're ready to actually embody something different, this is the work that I do inside the Signature Glow session. It's a one-on-one space where we identify the root patterns running your life, regulate what's driving them, and map your next step forward. It's not surface level fixes, it's true identity recalibration. So if you're ready to stop being your own bully and start leading yourself differently and rekindling your inner glow so that you can live a life that feels happy and fulfilling, then I invite you to book a Signature Glow session. Because inside that session, again, we identify the root of what's keeping you feeling stuck, map out your next step forward, and that could be stepping into private coaching or another aligned direction. So if you're tired of surviving and ready to come home to who you really are, the door is open. The link is in the description, and thank you so much for joining me on the Love Yourself as You Are series.